I am Alante Fields. I am a digital innovations content planner, and this is UX Pursuit.
Welcome to UX Pursuit, a podcast dedicated to the unique stories and journeys of UX practitioners, how they got where they are today, what hurdles they overcame, and what advice they have for those currently pursuing a thriving career in UX. I'm Tim Bridgham, your host, and my hope is that these conversations might help and inspire those who are currently on their own UX pursuit. Alante is a persistent and passionate researcher. This became clear to me after hearing more about her story and learning what drew her to UX, how she pursued her career, and how she's always striving to be a champion for human-centered design. She also talks about some unique skills necessary for excelling in UX and presents a thoughtful view on the need to get applied experience, whether that's through grad school, a boot camp, volunteering, or in her case, at an existing job. Well, Alante, thank you so much for joining me today and taking time to share your story and your more about you and your UX career. I think the best place to start usually is at the beginning. So let's start, like, where did your UX journey begin?
Yeah, happy to be here. So I usually say the beginning of my UX journey began when I was working as a web content specialist at the Foster School of Business at UW.
Okay.
So my role there was updating web pages, working with the different academic offices to kind of come up with a web strategy for their different programs. The team I was on was primarily focused on how do we kind of recruit prospective students to our different undergrad and MBA and PhD programs. And so one of my colleagues who was working there, she was getting ready to deploy a survey, and I thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to know more about that since I've always been kind of interested in research since I minored in anthropology as an undergrad at Western, but I decided I didn't want to pursue that because at the time I was just like, well, I think to be an anthropologist, you have to go to grad school. And at the time, I had no interest in going back to school. I didn't know what else you would do with an anthropology degree. So I just kind of let that sit and just be an interest.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my colleague was getting ready to deploy a survey. And I just asked her, can I help out with this? Like, I just want to know what you're doing and how you're doing and what this work, kind of like the impact will be for our department. And then just getting to work with her, and I learned that she actually graduated with her master's in human-centered design and engineering at UW.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, so this is the thing you need in order to do this kind of work. So I just talked to her about the program, and I was just like, well, if I am going to pursue a master's degree, let me just learn a little bit more about this field because I had never heard of it before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided that I would take an intro to UX course at the School of Visual Concepts.
Okay.
So it's just like a 6-week course where it just kind of go over the whole human-centered design cycle from just brainstorming all the way to product release. And I really enjoyed that class. So I was like, okay, if I had fun doing this, then I should have fun doing this for a couple more years.
Okay.
So kind of fast forward, application, all that stuff, got into the program, and yeah, that's where I've been in that world ever since.
You mentioned sort of you had a interest in research and you studied anthropology. What was it about research, or what is it about sort of now the work you do that really drew you to research or drew you to UX?
Yeah, so I think for me, I just have always been a very curious person. And so way back in undergrad when I was taking my first anthropology class, and I think for me, it was the idea that someone would go and work directly with a group of people and have a better understanding that they could then share with the world of how this society or tribe or whatever is organized, and also that reporting would challenge kind of our ideas of what that society is interested in and what they can do. So like I remember way back hearing about Margaret Mead, for example, and some of the work that she did, I think, in Papua New Guinea around gender norms. And because I think, at least in a kind of Western culture, have a very strict idea of men go out and hunt and women stay home and help with the babies. And so her research was just like, and this was way back in, I think, the early 1900s, was just actually, there's a group where the women go out and hunt and the men stay home and raise babies. And I was just like, oh, I've never heard this before. There's people who go out and like investigate and kind of just challenge our ideas of what people are doing.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that always just stuck in my mind. But then again, like the kind of the realist part of me was just like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. But also not totally realist, because I majored in political science as well, which doesn't also exactly have a kind of spelled out career path. But I felt like, well, I was graduating like in a midterm year, so I was like, I can get a job in a campaign, which is what I ended up doing. But yeah, just that whole challenging norms through research is something that really stuck with me.
Oh yeah, that's super awesome. Kind of like uncovering what's unknown or breaking down assumptions. Definitely see that a lot. I know for me, when I might go in and thinking, oh, this is how someone's going to react to this prototype, and then oh, okay, never mind. Like this is why we tested, because if we all just went with our assumptions, things would be often wrong.
Right.
Cool. So you're working at you said UW School of Business, right? And this research kind of piqued your interest. Was that sort of the first? This working with this colleague, that was the first introduction to like user experience or that kind of idea?
Yeah, like I don't think I'd heard of UX designer, those concepts. Only, when we define what they are, sure, but as a discipline, I hadn't heard of it before.
And then, so what was the process like? You said you felt like you wanted to get some more knowledge around it, and so you went to School of Visual Concepts, right? At that point, were you thinking, oh, I'm, or maybe through the program, were you thinking like a specific career in UX, or were you just trying to just soak up information?
I would say a little bit of both. So one, trying to soak in some information about what is this process exactly, and then the other part was a little bit of a test run for grad school. So at that point, once I had a little bit of time to start doing more UX work, or at least work with colleagues who were in that space. And I was doing my own research, and I determined a researcher is the path I want to go. And I just started looking into like, what does it take to be a UX researcher? And everything I found was a master's degree required.
Okay.
So I was just like, okay, well, let me look into these classes. And if I really like this field, then that's a good indicator that I should pursue a full-on master's degree in it.
Earlier, you talked about, studying anthropology and being required to go to grad school for that. And then when you discovered, oh, you kind of have to go to grad school to be a UX researcher, was that like a big obstacle? You were like, oh, great, I got to overcome this now? Or what was your feelings when you discovered that?
I think at that point, there's probably enough time removed from undergrad to then that I was okay with going back to school. And working at UW was already pretty simple to also go to school at UW. It just logistically worked very well. So I was just like, I don't know if there's a more ideal situation than to work on campus and then, go to class on the same campus and just walk like 10 minutes to go to class. So I was just like, it's pretty easy and ideal situation. So I should just take advantage of it while I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I wonder, or I imagine lots of folks are thinking, hey, is grad school the only path for me? Would you say, you talked in your story, you kind of discovered that you needed to go to grad school to do this. Do you think that's accurate for everyone, or do you think it depends on the situation? Or what are your thoughts on kind of these focused programs? You mentioned like School of Visual Concepts or like boot camps and things like that.
For me, I think it's a couple things. One, it's really a matter of what do you want to know. For me, I like to go beyond just here's how you do it, but here's why I'm doing it. I think at least my experience in grad school is not just here's how you run a test, but really thinking through the methodology behind the test that you run and understanding kind of your role as a researcher and working with participants, and creating a point of view of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you necessarily need a master's degree to be a UX researcher. There's, like you said, there's plenty of boot camps and mini classes and workshops that you can take.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you want to be kind of an expert in the craft, and I would say that you should probably go to grad school for it.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot with what I was thinking when I did the graduate certificate program, but I had sort of been working, in UX a little bit, and I'd been a research assistant. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of, like you said, sort of knew like, hey, these are the studies and how to run them and sort of the basics. But for me, I felt like I really wanted to understand like why I would choose this study or why I would choose that study. Sort of, I was illustrated it as like connecting the dots between like everything that I sort of was picking up working the job at the time. So I think it was really impactful in sort of, learning that why and owning that craft of understanding how to be a better researcher, how to just be a better practitioner. So that's cool. So then when you graduated from grad school, did you start applying for UX research jobs, or what was kind of next in your path?
Yeah, so I actually didn't apply for any jobs. So I was doing grad school part-time while continuing to work at UW full-time. And so during that course of time when I was in school and working at UW, I was able to change my position to I call it UX analyst. My manager just let me make it up, or she just let me make it up, I should say, because I started basically creating a one-woman UX research shop in addition to some of the other duties that I was in charge of. So I was doing that, and then maybe I want to say a few months before I was getting ready to graduate, a good friend of mine reached out to me and said, like, hey, my manager is thinking about this position. I think it would work perfectly for your skill set. Can I send over this job position to you? And I was like, sure. So I reviewed it. It didn't explicitly have UX research in it, but I could tell that this role was looking for someone with a human-centered design background, or at least that's what it needed.
Okay.
So I was like, yep, sign me up. I had already been thinking about Microsoft anyway as a place to work, just because some of the issues that I care passionately about, especially when it comes to ethics and deployment of AI and machine learning and things of that nature. So Microsoft just already seemed it was on my list. I should just say that.
Okay.
And so a couple months later, I applied for this position. I met with the manager. She's just like, I should probably rephrase that. So let me start. My friend sent me this job. I told her I'm interested in it.
Yes.
And then she was like, okay, send me your resume and I will send it to my manager. Her manager reviewed it. And she was like, yes, come in. I want to talk to you. I think we were supposed to meet for 30 minutes. We ended up talking for well over an hour.
Oh, wow.
And then she was just like, I want you to apply for this position. So I did. I had a little loop with a couple other folks. And then April, I was offered the position. And then I graduated from school in June. So I never had that that post-grad, what am I going to do? What should I apply? It just kind of, I wouldn't say handed to me because I definitely worked for it. Yeah. But it was presented to me before I had to go out and proactively start searching.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, my story is actually similar again, where I was working in IT and being a research assistant at a UX firm. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have to necessarily go through some of the turmoil of trying to apply for jobs and get experience. I just sort of was proving that at my company. So I feel really fortunate and lucky that I did that. But at the same time, people often remind me, well, you still had to work hard to get to that where you were. You still had to, prove yourself. Maybe it wasn't the traditional job interview.
Right.
But yeah, well, that's super interesting. So you're kind of proactively adjusting and shifting roles, like adapting your role at the school while you were taking classes. Were you starting to apply more of like usability testing or research surveys? What kind of things were you doing as this UX analyst role?
Yeah, so I was definitely running it from, this is a very Microsoft term, I feel like, but end to end.
Okay.
So I would kind of identify areas that I thought needed research, or different kind of coworkers would come up to me and ask me, like, is it possible to do some sort of research in this area? So I would work with them to determine the scope, draft a test plan, think through kind of the participant pool that we needed to recruit, how we're going to reach out to recruit to them. I would conduct all the studies by myself. Occasionally I'd have another coworker help out with notes, but usually I was alone. Some of the analysis I would do by myself, like surveys, for example, because we were using Qualtrics, and Qualtrics is pretty good about kind of showing you the percentages of different responses and things like that. And then I would rope in my colleagues to help with kind of some deeper qualitative analysis. So we would bring out the stickies with all the comments. Like I would print out all the comments from the survey. I'd glue it or tape it onto stickies, and then we'd do affinity diagramming together. Oh, wow. So that was kind of one way I was able to get some stakeholder and colleague buy-in, is by having them actually look at these verbatims and organize it by theme, so they could go into their meetings with our colleagues and say, I saw this user research and it said this, and I think make that a little bit stronger. And then I'd also have report outs that I'd share with our different colleagues as well, and try to work with them to actually action on these lists of improvements or enhancements or whatever it might be.
Yeah, really, truly was a one-woman UX shop.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I guess, how do you feel like that prepared you for your role at Microsoft now?
I think one big thing was it definitely created a sense of being self-driven. There was no one for me to report to as far as I'm going to have these milestones by this date, except for me. And I could definitely run, my test plan drafts by different people, but I didn't have like assistance with it. I think also they're not really being a model for what I was supposed to do. Like I definitely referred to a lot of my notes from grad school because I was in grad school at the same time while I was doing this. But there wasn't like someone, who had this role before me that I could mimic. So I was kind of creating this on my own, which is essentially what I was given the space to do with my current position.
And you said that when you saw this new position that your friend referred you for, it didn't seem, or you said it didn't have UX research like in the job description, but you felt like it needed like an HCDE or a human-centered approach. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, something that I'm very passionate about is ethics in AI. And to me, ethics and human-centered design they're the same thing, essentially. And so this role, as it was presented to me, was about leading the strategy for a new bot experience.
Okay.
And so to me, that meant if we're going to deploy this in a right way that's actually useful for the end user, then that requires research, co-design throughout the whole process iteration. So just thinking through how are we leveraging the human-centered design cycle, literally, to make this the best tool they can be. Yeah,
that's awesome. And so you mentioned earlier before we started recording, you definitely have a unique job title. What's your job title?
So my job title is Digital Innovations Content Planner.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you explain that to like your parents or like someone in an elevator?
So I normally say, it's funny because it's changed since I started. So at first it used to be I lead the strategy for our partner bot. Now I lead a strategy for a partner bot, and I manage a user research arm of our experience design studio. So
Okay.
I've added more to
There you go.
that role since I've been here since like a year and a half.
And way back to this first survey that you like piqued your interest and got you into UX, has your career sort of progressed as you thought it would? Have there been sort of these changes along the way, or has it sort of been idealized and kind of following that path?
I think, at least for me, because the way that my UX career started, like when I think about my role as UX analyst up until now, there's never been someone who was a UX analyst before me, and there wasn't a digital innovations content planner before me. So I think for me, it hasn't been like a thing that, oh, I have some expectations about what this role means because it's new. And so for me, I guess that's kind of where I'm comfortable, is new space and being adaptable to what it requires.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, like that you mentioned, self-starter and adaptability, those seem like traits that you've honed in your career. I'd be curious to understand or get your input on what other traits you think folks who are pursuing a career in UX should try to emulate and embody.
I think a couple things that come to mind is being reflective and not being so quick to respond necessarily. And so for that means to me being really thoughtful about kind of what you say and how you say it, and being strategic versus, everything's on fire, I need to respond right away. And I think especially as a UX researcher, you become really comfortable with asking questions and probing. I know that's the favorite like UX research word, but um, I think just being comfortable with unknowns, asking questions to figure out what is known and what do we need to continue to pursue for these answers, and not just immediately assuming that this person that you might be working with is incorrect or coming from a place of malice, but maybe they don't understand either. Because it just makes me think of, especially in grad school, we read so many case studies about kind of the early beginnings of UX. And I think it's probably a lot of people in the field who are familiar with the different like Xerox examples and kind of the example of different admins trying to use a printer and they couldn't. And then, the engineers at the time being like, they're doing this wrong. Why don't they understand? But really, when you start to ask questions and listen and taking what they say, is not that they don't know what they're doing. It's just we need to rethink the design to make it easier for them. I think it's just a really good way to approach anytime you're working with anyone or even just personal relationships is, are you taking the time to listen and be empathetic versus assuming that you have the answer and they don't? So that's one thing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is also being okay with silence. And I know that's a really hard one for a lot of people. And that was something also that we talked specifically in grad school about, is just giving people the space to answer questions and think and reflect for themselves instead of, trying to fill in empty air. Which I don't think probably as a society, we spend a lot of time allowing people to do is just think and have some time to reflect on what they think, what they want to say, how they want to say it.
Yeah, that last one definitely was something I had to learn when starting with usability testing or doing research sessions, because I, want to fill that space. And it is like a little awkward, but sometimes you give the participant that space to, you said, think, and then you get this great insight or this a great quote or something that helps inform the research in a really powerful way. So
Yep, totally.
I guess I would be curious to get your thoughts on working with designers and developers and engineers and kind of in that AI space. And I imagine you're kind of working with a variety of different skill sets, and how do you sort of oversee that or fit in research in like a thoughtful and appropriate way?
So I've been able to do that a couple ways. And as the bot project has evolved, the team has grown and there's been much more involvement. But in the early stages, the way that I would bring in more of that human-centered design element is by working with and trying to recruit a group of partners. So Microsoft partners are the end user of our bot project, and having time with them, dedicated time with them, as often as I could, to walk through, here's what we're thinking about doing, what do you think about it? How would you use this? What are you interested in? But also making sure that I left space, and it was pretty deliberate, that when we talk about whatever the thing is partners are trying to achieve, leave bot out of it. Not because I wanted them to ignore bot, but I didn't want to come from an angle of I'm solutioning already. Like, I already have the answer for your problem, as much as let's talk about what you need, and then it's up to me to go back to the team and take those needs and see how can we adapt bot to meet those needs.
Any other important insights that you, or other questions on the list that you feel like, oh yeah, I've got something to add there, or anything else that you feel like would be important for those exploring UX to know or consider?
I guess one question I would go back to is around kind of, is a master's degree required for it? So I think, to reiterate, I think it depends what you want to get out of it.
Yeah.
However, I definitely don't want to be kind of a gatekeeper or say that academia is the gatekeeper to whether you should be in this field. That's for sure.
Sure.
So I think it's just a matter of, you definitely want to get that applied experience. However you get that, if it's volunteering, if it's, you do find, a role that allows you to conduct UX research, whether or not you have a master's degree. But I definitely think it behooves us as people who work with the public to make sure that you know why you're doing the things that you're doing. And I think that will make you much more equipped to kind of be that best practitioner that you can be. Yeah,
great point. Absolutely. We kind of walked through your UX journey. What are you thinking next? That could be 10 years down the line, or it could be, getting that report out for that big meeting next week.
Yeah. Right now, kind of the things I'm thinking about is, at least in my current position, we are in I feel, a really good place as far as UX research and UX as a principle. We've got some momentum there now. And so I think what I'm focused on is, how do we keep that momentum going and really show the value of research and design? Because I think, and I'm sure there's probably other companies as well, they're experiencing kind of this transformation of thought of moving beyond, we've focused on engineering and release, but how are we measuring whether this is successful or not? And then what are those measurements of success? So I think for me, just continuing to be that person and that champion for human-centered design is important. I don't know what that role looks like, because that's kind of just been my trajectory this whole time, but whatever I can do to keep that going, that's where I want to be.
I was going to say, you're definitely going to do it yourself, though. From your past experience,
probably.
You're not going to wait for a role to open up. You're just going to do it, which I think is super awesome. That's exciting stuff to hear. I know lots of stories around, it's really hard to get people to get buy-in in research, or buy-in in human-centered design and the whole process. And so whenever that can happen at a company or on a team or a small group, then that's definitely a win. And then hopefully it can just bubble out further and further, and we can apply these things beyond just technology and into other aspects of of our lives. So
Yeah, absolutely agree.
that's awesome. Awesome. Well, Alante, thank you so much for taking time to share your story and share your path in UX. Super interesting stuff, and I can't wait to meet the next digital innovations content planner out there.
Yeah.
If people wanted to learn more about you or connect, where can they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. So I think it's /Alante-Fields.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
A big thank you to Alante for sharing her story on the podcast. Her ability to recognize opportunities where human-centered design could be utilized, and then to take charge and make those opportunities a reality is very admirable. I'm happy to report that since we last spoke, Alante is now a user researcher at Microsoft Mixed Reality, working on products like the Hololens. She also informed me that, like her first role at Microsoft, she worked closely with those in her network to help create the role she's in now. Thank you so much for checking out the show. If you're thinking about or pursuing a career in UX or currently work in UX, I hope you find these discussions informative and helpful. You can find UX Pursuit wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now, and if you know others pursuing a career in UX, please tell them about the show. If this is the first episode you're hearing, take some time to check out past episodes featuring our other fantastic UX practitioners. You can learn more about them or me by heading over to uxpursuit.com. We're approaching the end of Season 1, but there is still time to send me your UX career questions for the panel discussion that will be our final episode. Send me your questions by emailing me at hello@uxpursuit.com. As always, a big thanks to Irene Barber for creating all the music you hear on the podcast. Be sure to check out her music under the artist name Nearby on Spotify or at nearbymusic.bandcamp.com. Again, thanks so much for listening. I'm Tim Bridgham, a senior UX researcher, and this is UX Pursuit. Wow, that's such a cool, interesting title I have never heard before with the Digital Innovations Content Planner.
Yeah, I always joke whenever I have presentations and I introduce myself. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm the only person in the world with that job title, so probably thank my manager for that.